The band stopped so abruptly that the sudden silence felt like a physical shock rolling through the 18,000 people packed into the Los Angeles Forum, and in that silence, two security guards froze mid-step in the aisle where they'd been moving toward the elderly man, clutching a wicker basket to his chest. Wait, because what happened in the next 12 minutes would become one of the most retold stories about Michael Jackson's character, the kind of moment that revealed who he was when the spotlight gave him the choice to look away or to see. It was March 4th, 1988, the second night of 3 sold-out shows at the Forum, as part of the Bad World Tour. The energy in the arena had been electric from the moment Michael took the stage at 8:47 p.m. in his black military jacket with gold braiding. He'd been performing for almost an hour, and the crowd had been on their feet the entire time. When he started Human Nature around 9:35, the arena had settled into that particular kind of focused attention that song always commanded, thousands of people swaying in near darkness while stage lights painted Michael in amber and blue. The band was halfway through the second verse when Michael's gaze swept across the crowd and locked onto something in the left section that made his hand come up. The abrupt silence was disorienting. People in the audience looked around confused, wondering if there was a technical problem or a medical emergency. The security guards who'd been moving down the aisle toward an elderly man stopped completely, uncertain whether to continue or wait for direction. The air conditioning system in the Forum had a specific hum, a low mechanical drone that nobody consciously noticed until it suddenly cut off when the music stopped, and in that vacuum of sound you could hear a wicker basket creaking as someone's hands tightened around the handle. The elderly man's name was Robert Hayes. He was 78 years old and lived in south-central Los Angeles with his wife Clara, who'd been sick for months with an illness requiring medication costing more than their fixed income could cover. Here's the thing about why Michael stopped, and you won't understand it until later, but keep it in your mind. The real reason wasn't what everyone in that arena was seeing in front of them. It was something Michael had seen in Robert's eyes in that split second before the music cut out. And when we come back to this detail, everything you're watching will shift. Robert baked cookies in their small kitchen, wrapped them in clear plastic, and sold them for 50 cents each at churches and parks. That night he'd heard about the concert and thought he could sell to people leaving. He'd arrived early, waited outside, but when he saw the crowds and strict security, he realized he'd never make sales outside. So Robert did something he'd never done. He waited until guards were distracted and slipped through a side door. Robert walked through the Forum's corridors with his heart pounding, knowing if caught he'd be arrested. But Clara needed her medicine, and they were $43 short. He found an entrance and stepped into the darkness, began moving down the aisle, whispering, "Cookies, homemade 50 cents. Most people ignored him. Some gestured for him to leave. In 15 minutes he'd sold 4 cookies, making $2. Security spotted him, 2 men in black uniforms moving toward him from opposite sides. Robert knew he had maybe 20 seconds before they reached him. He tried to move faster, offering cookies with more urgency, but nobody paid attention to an old man with a basket. And then Michael saw him. From the stage, Michael noticed the elderly man, moving desperately with security closing in, and something in that image made the decision automatic. The music cut off. When Michael raised his hand, every musician stopped mid-measure. The 18,000 people turned their attention to the stage where Michael stood with his microphone, looking directly into the left section. Backstage at that exact moment, Michael's tour manager checked his watch. 9:37 p.m. The Forum had a hard curfew at 11 p.m. Every minute they went over cost the production $2,500 in overtime. They had 3 songs left in the set list, 42 minutes on the clock, and Michael was about to burn half of that standing in an aisle. Michael pointed at Robert, who stood frozen clutching his basket, thinking he was about to be publicly humiliated before being removed. Michael's voice came through the speakers, clear and gentle, cutting through the silence like a single note held in empty air. "Sir, please wait right there." Then Michael turned toward the security guards. "Leave him alone. He's my guest." The guards stopped, confused, because it was obvious this elderly man wasn't anyone's guest, but they weren't going to contradict Michael Jackson in front of 18,000 witnesses. What Michael had in his jacket pocket that night wasn't random. 3 weeks earlier in Chicago, a stranger had tried to give him money outside a hospital, saying it was for whatever charity Michael supported. Michael had kept that roll of bills ever since, looking for the right moment. Keep that detail in mind. Robert still didn't understand. He only knew the guards had stopped, and Michael Jackson was looking at him from the stage. Michael walked down the steps from the stage, his wireless microphone still live, his footsteps echoing in the absolute silence of the arena. He walked up the aisle to where Robert stood, and when he got close enough, he could see how worn Robert's clothes were, how thin his frame was, how his hands trembled holding the basket. The smell hit Michael before he spoke. Vanilla and cinnamon, the scent of homemade cookies hanging in the small space between them, domestic sweetness in an arena that usually smelled of industrial cleaning solution and spilled soda. Backstage, the clock kept ticking. 9:39 p.m. 40 minutes to curfew. "What's your name, sir?" Michael asked. His voice amplified throughout the forum. Robert's throat was so tight with nerves he could barely speak, but he managed. "Robert Hayes, Mr. Jackson. I'm sorry for the disruption. I just needed to sell a few cookies." Michael looked into the basket and saw the cookies wrapped in plastic, probably made in a kitchen that had seen better days, and asked, "How much are they?" 50 cents each, Robert said, his voice shaking. "They're sugar cookies and oatmeal raisin. I make them myself." Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out the roll. He counted quickly, about $800 in 20s and 50s. "How many cookies do you have there?" Robert looked into his basket, trying to count while his hands shook. "About 60, sir." Michael did the math. 60 cookies at 50 cents was $30. He held out the entire roll of $800. "I'll take all of them." Robert stared at the money, not understanding. "Sir, that's too much. The cookies only cost $30. Michael pressed the money into Robert's hand. "You're not just selling cookies. You're reminding me of something important. So take it all and don't argue with your customers." The audience was starting to understand what was happening, and a wave of applause began building, soft at first, then louder. 18,000 pairs of hands, creating a wave of percussion that built from whisper to thunder in 12 seconds. The curfew clock kept running. 9:42 p.m., 33 minutes to curfew. The tour manager was pacing backstage, doing math in his head. If Michael didn't get back on stage in the next 2 minutes, they'd have to cut at least one song from the finale. But Michael wasn't finished. He turned to face the crowd, Robert still standing beside him in the aisle, holding $800 with trembling hands, and Michael spoke into the microphone. "This man is here selling cookies because he needs the money, probably for medicine, or rent, or food. And instead of staying home feeling defeated, he came out here to work with dignity." Michael paused, letting the words settle. "I grew up watching my mother do exactly the same thing, sell whatever she could to feed us, and every time I see someone like Mr. Hayes working honestly, I remember her." The forum was completely silent now. Some people in the audience already had tears in their eyes. "So I'm going to ask you for a favor," Michael said. "Mr. Hayes has sold all his cookies, but if you want to help him anyway, I'm going to put this basket here at the front of the stage, and after the show you can leave whatever you want to give, and I'll make sure it gets to him." 9:45 p.m., 30 minutes to curfew. The countdown continued. Picture this from above. The stage lit like a small sun, the crowd in darkness, and between them this elderly man standing in a corridor of light. What you're watching is being captured by 12 cameras broadcasting to the arena's massive video screens, meaning everyone in that building is seeing this moment twice, once with their eyes, once on the screens above their heads. Hands started going up all over the arena, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people raising their hands, wanting to help. The movement rippled through the crowd, like wind through wheat, a physical wave you could track from the floor seats to the upper deck. Robert stared at the sea of raised hands, unable to comprehend that all these people wanted to give him money. Michael called one of the stage crew and had them bring Robert's wicker basket to the front of the stage with a sign that said, "For Mr. Robert Hayes." Then he turned to Robert and asked, "Where do you live, sir?" Robert gave his address in South Central, his voice barely working. Michael asked one of his assistants to write it down. Then he walked Robert to a seat in the 5th row that someone had vacated, insisting he stay and watch the rest of the show as his personal guest. 9:48 p.m., 27 minutes to curfew. Every second counted now. Robert tried to refuse, saying he didn't want to cause more trouble, but Michael was firm and kind until the elderly man sat down in a seat that probably cost more than he earned in a week selling cookies. When Michael returned to the stage and the music started again, the entire forum erupted in applause that lasted almost 4 minutes. Not for the song they were about to hear, but for what they'd just witnessed. 9:55 p.m., 20 minutes to curfew. The tour manager radioed the band, "Cut 2 songs, go straight to finale after this." Michael nodded when he heard it through his earpiece. The cost of stopping for Robert, cutting Billie Jean and Beat It from the set list. He didn't hesitate. And for the rest of the concert, Michael could see Robert in the 5th row, an elderly man in worn clothes sitting among people in expensive outfits, crying silently as he listened to music he'd probably never been able to afford to hear live. When the concert ended, and people started leaving, hundreds stopped at the front stage where the basket sat. This is 1988. People have disposable cameras and camcorders, but not a single person pulls one out to document themselves donating. No performance of generosity. Just silent lines of people leaving money and walking away. They left $5 bills, 20s, 50s, hundreds. The line stretched through the center aisle. The crew brought a second basket when the first filled. When they counted the money, over $37,000. Robert was backstage waiting. When they showed him the money, the elderly man collapsed, crying. The roll of bills from Chicago. Michael had kept it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Robert was that moment. The stranger who'd given Michael that money had said, "For whatever charity you support." Michael had found it. Michael kept his word. The next afternoon he arrived at Robert's small house in South Central. They found Robert and Clara in a 2-room house with cracked walls and a single-space heater. Clara was in bed, wrapped in blankets, because they couldn't afford heat, and she was always cold from her illness. Michael sat on their only chair and talked with them for over an hour. The winter sunlight through thin curtains made the room feel both intimate and exposed. When he left, he gave them the $37,000 plus $15,000 from his own money. He left his phone number, said he'd make sure Clara got her medicine. The story spread through newspapers. Reporters wrote about it as proof fame hadn't changed him, that he still remembered being the poor kid from Gary who understood what it meant to struggle. Some cynics said it was a publicity stunt, but anyone there that night knew it was impossible to fake that emotion, that respect and dignity, instead of pity. Not a single photo exists of Michael's visit to Robert's house. No cameras, no press, just a promise kept in private. Robert lived another 4 years. Because of that money, he paid for Clara's medicine, repaired their house, lived without constant desperation. The detail I told you about at the beginning, The one about what Michael saw in Robert's eyes. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't shame. It was dignity. The same expression Michael remembered seeing in his mother's face when she sold Avon door to door, refusing charity when she could offer something in exchange. That look was what made Michael stop the music mid-note. Michael never talked about it in detail. He'd simply say, "I did what anyone would do," and change the subject. But people who worked with him noticed that after that night, he always asked if there were street vendors before security removed them. In several concerts over the following years, he stopped shows to help others, never with the same fanfare, but always with the same generosity. The story became legendary as an example that character isn't revealed in how you treat people who can give you something, but in how you treat people who can't give you anything except the opportunity to be decent. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. And if you want to know what happened the night Michael stopped a show because the lights went out and performed the entire second half in near darkness, tell me in the comments.